Um, Thank you. And we'll ask that as Paul makes his presentation, if you have questions you'd like Paul to respond to, that you enter them in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Connie will be keeping track of those questions, and then we'll ask Paul to respond to them at the end of his program. We'll give him the bulk of our time simply to make his presentation, and then we'll deal with the questions at the end. So our chapter is very pleased to welcome Paul Bogard for this evening's presentation. Paul is the author of several books about the subject of his talk. His most recent works are To Know a Starry Night, and the children's book, What If Night. Paul is associate professor of English at Hamline University in St. Paul, where he teaches environmental literature and writing. In tonight's talk, based on his critically acclaimed book, The End of Night, Paul will share the importance of darkness to humans and wildlife, seeking to restore our awareness of how the spectacularly primal, wildly dark night sky has influenced our experience of everything from science to art. So with that introduction, Paul, welcome. So glad you could be with us.
I am now unmuted. Thanks, Keith. I appreciate the introduction, and it's really nice to be here with everybody tonight. As Keith mentioned, I'm teaching at Hamline now. I am a true Minnesota native, though. I grew up here and went to Carleton College, and then began my sort of academic road trip, as it were, living in the Southwest for 8 years, and then up in the Sierras and Nevada for 4 years, and then northern Wisconsin and North Carolina, and then Virginia for 8 years. So I've kind of been around, and came back to Minnesota 2 years ago, and hopefully we'll never have to leave. This is home, so it's great to be here. And one of the things that has meant is that I can really kind of finally commit myself to my home community. And one of the ways I've done that is to start a group called Starry Skies North, which is a chapter of the International Dark Sky Association. We started about 6-8 months ago. And it's focused on the problem of light pollution that I'll be talking with you about tonight. But one of our main goals is to connect with other groups who are doing, whose work is connected to ours. And there's no better example of that than Audubon and the work that is done. Birds and artificial light pollution is a vitally important subject. And I hope that especially in the Q&A, we can really talk some more about that. I think I'll start my, share my screen and start my presentation here. Hopefully the technology will agree. Connie, does that look good? Or Keith, does that look good on your end?
Yes, looks good, Paul.
Great. So what I'd like to do in this presentation is to introduce and talk about the issue of light pollution and the costs and the causes. I'd like to read a short passage or two from my book, The End of Night, and then I really look forward to answering any questions at the end. So I like to begin with this image, which is an image that reminds me of being a child. And as I mentioned, growing up in Minnesota, I grew up in Golden Valley, and we've always had a family cabin up north, as we say, up on Thunder Lake, about in the Emily, Outing, Reamer, up Highway 6, that area, if any of you know that area. And so my experience of night has been, my firsthand experience of night has been a wonderful one, which is to say that I got to experience, growing up in the 70s, I got to experience a real night. It was truly, truly dark at Thunder Lake. And so this experience of seeing pine trees and the Milky Way is what I think of when I think of growing up with that night. And I like to say that that experience imprinted on me. It just became part of who I was. I still go to that cabin as much as I can, especially in the summer, sometimes in the winter. And the experience of seeing the night sky or just being out in the night is such a wonderful one. This isn't a crystal clear image, but I kind of like that because it reminds me of humidity and stuff in the air, sounds, especially smells, the big full moon over the lake water. This whole experience of being out at night has been inspirational to me all my life. I still love to take the canoe out into the middle of the lake, especially on a night like this where it's totally calm, and just lie back and watch the Milky Way arc overhead. It's a wonderful experience still. That experience, that firsthand experience, led to my book, The End of Night, which was published almost 10 years ago. It's amazing, and it's been a wonderful ride. It was wonderful to research it, and it's been wonderful to talk about it in the years since. More recently, as Keith mentioned, I've written a children's book called What If Night, which is a shortened version of What If Night Never Came. And there is a page, a spread in the book showing geese, I think, at night. It was kind of trying to get at what if night never came? It wouldn't be a good thing for birds. And so that was part of that story. Even more recently, I've continued to write articles, and I've done a couple for Audubon, including one about the fires, the Black Summer fires in Australia a couple of years ago, which were so impactful to the birds in Australia, that focused on the Regent honeyeater, that article. And then just about a year ago, an article on the wonders of night migration. And so that was a wonderful experience for me because I got to talk to a lot of the top researchers in the country who are studying night migration in general, but especially nocturnal migration, and all the new technologies that are being used to track this phenomena. I heard recently the idea, which I think is wonderful, which is that if we could see the nocturnal bird migrations especially in the spring and the falls, it would be the greatest wildlife spectacle on the planet. I just think that it's a wonderful way to imagine, to visualize what's happening right now across our country. That article focused on a guy named Kyle Horton. Some of you may know of his work. He's at Colorado State now, who's really, along with some colleagues, has really revolutionized the use of weather radar to track night migrating birds. The problem for night migrating birds and for anybody who cares about night, though, is our overuse and misuse of artificial light at night. And I say that carefully because it is, the problem is not necessarily just artificial lights in general. And no one is saying, let's not have any lights anywhere, but we are saying we're using more of it than we need, and we're using it in ways that's unneighborly, unintelligent, and frankly, just kind of dumb in many ways. And the costs and impacts of that overuse and misuse of artificial light at night are many. So here we have an unshielded light in a parking lot, a good example of light that's shining in all directions. A lot of the lighting that we have, unfortunately, is shining in the exact opposite direction that we wanted it to, which is to say either straight up into the sky, or in this case, bouncing off billboards and shining into the sky. We also have a whole lot of horizontally shining light, like these wall packs, which are ostensibly to light this parking lot. But you can see that if you're the photographer, you're going to be all lit up in this picture, and everything behind you will be as lit up as well. The main thing maybe to notice here is that these lights are unshielded. So the light is allowed to blast in all directions rather than being, oh, you can hear my 4-year-old, rather than being shielded down to just light the parking lot, which is what they say they're trying to light here in the first place. All this light, the light that's shining up into the sky, the horizontal light, is what we see here, which is these satellite images of the Earth from space. I think they're amazing. They're in many ways quite beautiful. They're striking, at least. But they are also images of waste. The light that we're seeing here from space is just wasted light. There's no reason for us to be seeing this light from space like this. Many of you have probably seen the compilation of those satellite images creating the world at night. It's, again, just a striking image. It really shows you one thing, where a lot of people are, where the big cities are, where a lot of the Western civilizations especially. And one thing to take note here, I just had a student do a presentation on lighting in Thailand. And one of the points we talked about was, that's really quite remarkable, is that when you look on this map and you see lighting in South America or India or Africa or Australia, Thailand, it's all the same technology that came from the West, from the US and Western Europe. And even more importantly, it's all the same thinking. We've exported, or some would say even colonized, the planet in terms of the way we think about using light, which is, as I said before, wasteful this way. Here's another picture of what we call glare, one of the standard components of light pollution. This is another issue. This is called light trespass. This is where we have light from one property shining onto another property. Some of you may have this very situation in the houses where you live, where your neighbor has really bright lights, and they allow those lights to shine into your yard or shine into your house. And this is really unfortunate. Light trespass. Sky glow is another element of light pollution. This is a remarkable side-by-side image because it's taken from the exact same location. On the left is one night, I believe it was in 2003, when there was a power outage, and the photographer wandered down the street and took a picture of what the sky would look like without light pollution. And the image on the right, on the other side, where we see sky glow, that's what people normally see from night to night. So it really gives you a sense of what's been lost by all this light rising into the sky. The recipe for light pollution is the same everywhere. As I was saying, sports lighting or intramural fields here, super bright lights, oftentimes left on all night long. Parking lots, a big problem, especially. This is an image from a parking lot in Virginia, where I used to work, at 3 in the morning. There's nobody there, but the lights are as bright as they are at any other time of night when there might actually be somebody there. Gas stations are another big problem. It's estimated that gas stations and parking lots are lit 10 times as brightly as they were 20 or 30 years ago. So there's been an increase in lighting, not only in the number of lights, but also just the amount of light, the brightness that we have been using. And people will say, well, we need all this light for safety and security. This level of lighting that we see in gas stations and parking lots is really beyond the level that you need for safety and security. And in the case of gas stations like this, it has everything to do with attracting customers. We're attracted to light. And the industry knows it. And so they'll just make their gas stations as bright as possible to get us to stop by. Another big ingredient and troubling ingredient, this image from Las Vegas, some of you might recognize, but on the right-hand side is the electronic billboard, which more and more of these are springing up across the country. very bright, and oftentimes left on all night long, and arguably a distraction to drivers, which could add to dangerous conditions on the road. So as I said, all these lights together create these images, or they're reflected in these images we see from satellites in space. But I show you this image now because I want to talk with you a little bit about the actual spread of light pollution, because in these images, it's very easy to think, I guess you'd say, that once you get out of the cities, it's still dark. And I guess the point that I would make is it is darker outside the cities, but it's not really naturally dark anymore. So in the city, if you know your geography, you can see Western Europe there, especially Madrid, Paris, London. If down into Italy, we can see Milan, Rome. There is what I like to point out sometimes, a kind of a valley of darkness in northern Italy, kind of a long strip of what looks like it's dark there. Come back to that in a second. About 25 years ago, a couple Italian astronomers and an American here put together what they called the World Atlas of the Artificial Night Sky Brightness. It's essentially an atlas of light pollution, because they wanted to show, using computers and colors, the actual spread of light pollution. And this is the map. This is actually updated just a few years ago from that original map, but this is their map, the World Atlas of the Artificial Night Sky Brightness. And if you see here, you can still see the major cities. You see Madrid, Paris, London, down into Italy, you see Milan, you see Rome. But notice that what I had pointed out kind of in, hopefully you were able to see it, that northern Italy, kind of that valley of darkness there is, it's not dark. It is darker than the white hot splotches of light in the cities, but it is not naturally dark. To get back to natural darkness, you have to go out into the ocean here. The US looks very similar, which is to say that there is, according to their maps, no place east of the Great Plains that is naturally dark anymore. Obviously, there are places that are darker. Cities are the brightest, but you have to go out west to get back to some places that are close to naturally dark or naturally dark, and those places are fading fast. I would just pause here for a second as we think about birds, and imagine the birds that are migrating north this time of year from South and Central America. And many of you probably know those flyways, and you can kind of overlay those flyways on this map of lights, and you start to get a sense of kind of the artificial light gauntlet that the birds have to make it through if they're heading further up north into Canada, say. The growth of light has been, as one person told me when I was working on the book, very rapid, right? If you look at the 50s to the 70s to 97 was when they first did the data for these maps, till they're, what were projections of 2025, we're almost there, and it looks pretty close to what the map we just saw. But this growth has been really pretty rapid over the last, let's say, 50, 60 years, but just slow enough that most people don't notice, right? So it's been actually pretty rapid. If I can remember, as I was saying as a kid, the mid 70s, what it was like back then. Some of you no doubt can even remember back further. We've by and large lost those dark places, and now we're in an entirely different world very quickly, but as I said, just slow enough that people don't really notice. So that's one way to think about the spread of light pollution. Here's another. This is an abbreviated version of what's called the Bordeal Scale. It's a 9-point scale or 9-level scale of darkness, 9 being our brightest places. So pretty much any inner city, downtown Minneapolis, would certainly qualify as 9. Down to 1, which would be those natural places I was just talking about, natural darkness. The remarkable thing about this way of thinking about levels of darkness is that most Americans will live most of their lives in level 5 and above. So they will rarely or never experience the levels of darkness that are lower than that. I borrowed the idea of that 9-level scale for my book, The End of Nights. I actually start in chapter 9 and I work my way down to chapter 1. I start in Las Vegas and Times Square, some very bright places. In fact, when astronauts look at the Earth from space and take those photographs, I guess it's the satellite photographs actually, the brightest pixel is the Las Vegas Strip. Las Vegas itself isn't the brightest city just because it's not the biggest city, but the most intense bright light is coming from the Strip, and that's where I start my book, working my way down to chapter 1. I'll point out here a couple of chapters. Chapter 6 is all about the human physical health impacts from artificial light at night, which I can talk more about if anybody's interested later. And then chapter 5, the ecology of darkness, which has to do with our impact on wildlife, including birds. I would say a couple things here on this slide. Number one is the thing that drives me in my writing, and let me say this, I meant to say this at the start, I'm not at all an astronomer. I don't come to this issue as an astronomer or a scientist. I come to it as a writer, as an English professor, as somebody who has just always loved nighttime and the natural world. And my main motivation for the work that I do is wildlife, is to try to speak for our fellow creatures, for these animals, these birds that can't speak for themselves. So talking about birds is comes very naturally to me. I mean, that's what's in my heart. So the other thing I would say is I wanted to share a piece of from the End of Nights that talks about a guy named Henry Beston, who wrote a book called The Outermost House in 1928 about his time on Cape Cod. He writes a lot about the birds there. And I said, I can't tell you if the slide is from Cape Cod or even anything close to Cape Cod. So forgive me, bird people, if you're looking at this thinking, this has nothing to do with Cape Cod or ocean birds. Just work with me here for a second. I'd like to share with you a couple paragraphs from The End of Night. So Henry Beston wrote this book called The Outermost House, published in 1928. A really beautiful book. If you don't know it, I highly recommend it. He was, if you can imagine, living on Cape Cod for a year alone in this small cottage. And it was really, during the writing of the book, I got to go to Cape Cod and go out where to Beston's Beach. And the cottage was actually washed away years ago during a storm, but you can still kind of go to where he was. And he was especially attuned to the birds. So I'll read just a paragraph here for you about the birds. So Beston, I said, in his second chapter from The Outermost House, Autumn, Ocean, and Birds, he developed his observation of, quote, the lovely sight of the group instantly turned into a constellation of birds, into a fugitive Pleiades whose living stars keep their chance positions. He asked, are we to believe that these birds, all of them, are machina, as Descartes long ago insisted? Asserting that, quote, we need another and a wiser and perhaps more mystical concept of animals, he argued that in a world older and more complete than ours, they move finished and complete, gifted with extensions of the senses we've lost or never attained, living by voices we shall never hear. He was writing of the sensory gifts the birds enjoyed long before scientists would make the same argument. His perceptions of the birds simply the result of his paying close attention to the world. Just love his writing, and again, the fact that he was writing almost 100 years ago about, he has one quote where he says, with lights and ever more lights, we drive the holiness and the beauty of night away. It was just incredible that he was noticing that nearly 100 years ago. Birds, of course, aren't the only wildlife impacted by our overuse and misuse of artificial light at night. Here you have a pretty revealing graph of nocturnal animals, but there also are even more species that are crepuscular, meaning they're active at dawn and dusk primarily. They are also often incredibly impacted by our artificial light at night. Some of the ones, if we have heard anything about wildlife being impacted, about the natural world being impacted, we may have heard of the studies, recent studies showing the impact to insects. This has huge ramifications, obviously, for birds, insect-eating birds. Insect populations have been, what studies have been done, which are not many, have shown real drops in insect populations. And there are a lot of reasons for that, but one of them is light pollution. I just like this image because it just shows how anything that's adapted to these woods, any nocturnal or crepuscular creature adapted to these woods has lost that habitat with the use of these lights. The issue around light pollution, one of the things that makes it a tough issue to deal with, and I want to talk about what we can do as individuals and as communities about this issue. You would think that you might think that all it would take would be to show folks some slides of lights being blasted straight into the sky and say, like, this doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't make sense to have lights blasting in all directions. But very quickly with this issue, the biggest obstacle we come, I guess I would say the biggest obstacle, there are others, but is essentially our fear of the dark and our belief that because some light can help us be safer and more secure, that ever more light will help us be even more safe and secure. Or if you want to just reduce it further, darkness is bad, light is good, and more light is better, right? So you go to the store and you buy safety and security lighting to deter crime and keep your family safe. Unfortunately, that kind of lighting is too often this kind of lighting, which is unshielded, especially these quote unquote security lights down on the bottom, that create a situation like this. And I'll show you two images that are essentially the same. The only difference is in the second image, the photographer will hold up their hand to shield the lights. So here you have a very bright, quote unquote, security light shining in all directions, representative of so many of the lights in our society, unshielded, shining in all directions. When the photographer shields this light, then you can see the bad guy. Right there he is, looking quite menacing in the open fence there. If we go back, I don't know how your screens are showing this, but you can actually see that person, but they're hidden by shadows, number one. Number two, our eyes are shutting down, our pupils are constricting because of all that bright light. And number three, and maybe most damaging, is when we see bright light, we think it means safety, right? So there's the illusion of safety. If we are really serious about safety at night, we would shield our lights, make it more easy for us to see the quote unquote bad guys. And we would bring back the stars, as this highly technical graph will show you. As we don't shield our lights, we can't see the stars. As we begin to shield those lights, we bring back the stars. And I would say we make life better for migrating birds. I'll close here in the last couple of minutes by just talking about some of the intangible aspects, or I guess I would say costs, to light pollution. First, I'd say again that light at night can be very beautiful. Houses of Parliament, Big Ben, certainly Paris, Notre Dame here that we see. We also can control our lighting. This is an image of Flagstaff, Arizona, which has maybe the most effective lighting ordinances in the country because of the Lowell Observatory there. And you can see it's still a city, it's still functioning, but the lights are more of an amber color and the lights are almost all shielded. So it's just a different way of lighting, an example of what we could do. I mentioned those intangible costs. So we have the wasted money, we have of lighting, we have impacts to human health, we have impacts to wildlife, as we'll no doubt talk more about in just a second. We have the cost of energy, we have carbon emissions when coals burn for electricity, so lots and lots of costs. One thing that we forget, but that I'd like to remind people as an English professor and as a writer are of the intangible costs. And so I love this image of the single human being under a starry sky. And we have taken what was once one of the most common human experiences, which is coming face to face with the universe, and made it one of the most rare. Most people in the country now have never or very rarely had this experience. And the costs to that, to losing that, are many. Contemplation, sense of spirituality, an artistic sense. I sometimes think, for example, of Van Gogh and A Starry Night, which people say Van Gogh had his issues, but he was also painting a starry sky that has disappeared. A friend of mine who's a astronomer in Texas did an updated version of A Starry Night, factoring in light pollution, and this is what he produced. I want to take you back here to where I started, which is to say that experience as a child imprinted on me. I now have, this was almost exactly 4 years ago, my daughter Amelie, she just turned 4. She was tiny then. She's up to 34.8 pounds. We just weighed her today. We got her reading the classics right off the bat, of course. But when I think about the future and the work that I'm doing, why I'm doing it, the world that I want to create, I'm thinking about her. I'm thinking about her and her life, the kind of night sky that she'll know, the kind of birds she'll know, the kind of wild natural world she'll know. And I really, truly hope that it is a world that is rich in stars, like this image I took in Death Valley, or a professional image of Death Valley from one of those level 1 Bordeal Scale places that are left. A world that is full of stars and wildlife and wonder and beauty. And thank you for listening to my talk, and I look forward to any questions that you might have here. Let's see, I will stop sharing and
Thank
turn it
you,
over to
Paul.
Connie.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
I wanted to share that a couple of people put in the chat that your photo of the setting sun while you were reading from the book about Cape Cod is a photo of the sandhill cranes over the Platte River in Nebraska. So you
Yeah,
can tell we have a number of people in the group who have been there, you know, to see the sandhill cranes.
Well, the embarrassing thing is I've actually been there, and I wrote about that in my book, The Ground Beneath Us, and I should recognize that, but I was just looking for a, you know, it's obviously it's hard to get photographs of birds migrating at night. Although I will say, if I could, it'll just take a minute. I wanted to share something which is maybe everybody here knows it, but it's that the work done by Kyle Horton and the others on Birdcast, and just this is a way to image birds migrating at night, whether tonight 347 million, tomorrow up to 380 million, really, and you can see the intensity in our neck of the woods is growing. So we can't take photographs necessarily, but we are beginning to at least create images of all these birds migrating at night.
Well, thank you. I wanted to just also point out that I put a link in the chat to an article from the Star Tribune 2019 that the Twin Cities was named by the Cornell Lab of Ornithology one of the worst regions for migrating birds and light pollution because of light pollution. There is a question in the question Q&A by Tori that said, I live in Minneapolis and I've noticed in recent years that the lighting is mostly focused down to the ground. And Tori, I don't know if Tori can speak a little bit more to this. That's good news if, you know, and maybe some people are more aware than in the past. I personally haven't noticed that.
I can comment on that.
Okay.
What Tori might be noticing is the implementation of LEDs throughout the Twin Cities. So those lights are by and large focused down, and the promise of LEDs is great because they can be directional, because they are electronic lighting, they're not electric lighting. We can program them. By and large, we're not really using those possibilities very much. And in fact, what we're seeing a lot of is because LEDs are more energy efficient, we're just using more of the lights, right? People are like, oh, we're saving money. So, and those lights, even though they're focused down, tend to be intensely bright. Some of you may have had that experience of driving along and all of a sudden you're under one of those lights and it's so bright. So that's part of maybe what we're seeing. The other thing too is that there are still plenty of lights that are not focused down and plenty of lights that are unshielded, especially on buildings, warehouses, street lighting is often in the city. I can look out my window here on Minnehaha Parkway and see lights that are partially shielded, I would say, but not very shielded. So even though we're seeing more of those downward focused lights, those LEDs, Minneapolis is still, and St. Paul, the Twin Cities still not a good place for migrating birds, I would say.
Thanks, Paul. Mark is asking if you know whether there are night vision cameras that can visualize migrating birds. Any kind of?
I haven't heard anything about that.
Keith has commented that Duluth produced a marvelous video a few years ago about light pollution. And I think you know about Duluth's efforts, correct? Because you're actually affiliated with that chapter. And we're wondering if that video is still broadly available. It was really a great resource.
Yeah, and I was fortunate to be in the video, which was kind of fun. Duluth has done some great work. They are part of Starry Skies North, the group that I started here has joined forces with the folks in Duluth. I think that video is available on the Starry Skies North website, but I would have to look to make sure. I think it is still available there for folks to see.
Thank you. George is asking if you're aware of any studies that suggest security lights help criminals see what they are doing versus deterring crime.
Yeah, I can't name a specific study that suggests exactly that, but that is certainly what I heard when I was doing the research for the book from specialists in this area who said criminals are as afraid of the dark as the rest of us are. And they would much rather work in lighted conditions where they can see what they're doing. Unfortunately, the literature, the studies on the relationship between lighting and crime, darkness and safety, all those issues is relatively sparse. There's not a ton of it. Most of it is fairly equivocal, which is to say sometimes more lighting is good, sometimes darkness is better. There have been a couple recent studies that have argued that more light, especially in crime-ridden urban areas, suddenly made that crime go down. But the people that I know who deal with this issue all the time, especially the folks at the International Dark Sky Association, say that these studies are really fraught with assumptions, and that at the end of the day, you just can't argue that more light will make us safer.
You know, what I have found on social media and other attempts to get the point across about safety versus pollution is that this is an issue, as you mentioned earlier, that light is considered good, dark is considered bad. And so people in general, a lot of people don't even care if there's research that shows, you're not safer. They just want to feel safer. And I think that's, really a sign of our times, as
No,
well.
it's true. I mean, light doesn't make us safer, but it makes us feel safer is absolutely right. And I can talk for 45 minutes. I can give this presentation, even be more detailed about the costs of all this light. And the first question will be, yeah, but don't we need it for safety and security? It's as though it just trumps everything else that we might talk about.
Yeah. Do you know if there is any legislative activity about reducing light pollution, either nationally or at other levels? I can speak a little bit to some of the work that the Audubon chapter of Minneapolis is doing, but do you know of any proposals to try to legislate this to reduce light pollution?
I don't actually know any immediate proposals. I do know that New York State has had some luck with working with light pollution. Some of the Audubon folks that I know from there have talked about that. There are statewide ordinances. For example, in New Mexico has a statewide ordinance. Certainly there are city ordinances that are designed to limit lighting or to describe the kind of lights that a community wants to have. But no, nothing immediately that I know of for light pollution, which doesn't mean it's not happening. I'm not aware of it.
Okay. I'll just add what we know. We know a little bit about what's going on here in our own city, because the Audubon chapter Minneapolis has been advocating for an ordinance as part of a larger ordinance for the Mississippi River Corridor critical area, which is mandated by the state that every municipality between Hastings and Anoka has to come up with special protections for the natural resources along the Mississippi River. And our chapter worked really hard to analyze the model ordinance that the Department of Natural Resources had put out, and we urged them, and we succeeded in getting them to acknowledge that the river is the flyway. That wasn't even in there in the beginning. And now, luckily, our city council did require that the planning department would amend their ordinance to deal with bird collisions and light pollution. And so we've had conversations with the planning staff, and they understand, obviously, the security myth, but they also, we were kind of shocked when we talked about how no matter what you're doing, you can make it safe for birds. You can put the light downward and shield it, and you can still have safety, you can still have events. And it was kind of interesting that people still were thinking, well, we can't have baseball games. We can't play sports unless we pollute the night sky. So I really was glad to see that example you gave of that. Was it in Arizona, the town where it looked very different? And
Yep.
surely they had entertainment, and other activities going on, but with light that was not endangering birds.
Mhm.
Anne has mentioned that there's Toronto has a very good guide on effective lighting, and it addresses the safety issue and the wildlife issue. And she's put the link in the chat. Thank you for that, Anne. And I just wanted if you could, Irene is asking, and this is the same question I had. Can you expand on the human health aspect, and if that might have more of an impact to change behaviors in people?
Yeah, it's an important question. The human health, physical health, and I would separate that from psychological or maybe emotional, spiritual health. The physical health, primarily, we talk about three different areas. One is the disruption of circadian rhythms, those rhythms that orchestrate our body's organs, the impeding the production of the hormone melatonin. Lack of melatonin in the bloodstream is linked to increased risks for breast and prostate cancer, and then the link of the impacts to sleep disorders and the contributions to those. And one of the most powerful things that I found during my research was how sleep disorders are tied to every major disease that we're dealing with. So diabetes, cancer, obesity, et cetera, et cetera. And I had a guy, one of the researchers at Harvard, who just said, our understanding of the impact of light at night and sleep is where our understanding of smoking was in the 50s. And he just expects the more that we learn about the importance of sleep and the impacts to quality sleep from light at night and other things, the more we'll realize how important it is. I asked recently, had a discussion with a guy from the International Dark Sky Association, and I said, I was doing my research a decade ago. Has anything changed? Can we be more specific or more have what we're able to say about the connections between light at night and physical health grown? And he said, we still can't say, quote unquote, light at night gives you cancer. But he said, everything we're finding points in the same direction, which is that exposure to artificial light at night is not good for us physically. And the amount of light that impacts our bodies is growing smaller and smaller as our understanding of that grows.
Wow, thank you. Are there certain countries that you feel are further ahead than others on this issue, whether it's protecting wildlife or protecting human health?
There was France actually had a nationwide artificial light law go into effect a few years ago, but I haven't heard how effective it has been. And it reminds me of when you asked the question about, legislation and ordinances, as I was talking, and, it's the same thing with so many issues. We can have rules, we can have laws, legislation, but without effective enforcement of those rules and laws, they're essentially teethless. And I think there are a lot of dark sky ordinances, as we say, or lighting ordinances that are essentially that there are laws in sort of name only. They're not super effective. They're not followed very closely.
Thank you. I hesitate to bring this up, but I feel I have to, Paul, since I attended that program with you in March and remember the young woman who spoke about the coming apocalypse, so to speak, with all the satellites. Could you just share a little bit about, this bit of scary news about how much it's worsening?
Yeah, I'm so glad, and I'll put my glad in scare quotes, but that, Connie, that you reminded me of that. It actually is remarkable to me that 10 years ago when I wrote The End of Night, I didn't even talk about the issue of low Earth orbit satellites. It wasn't anything anybody was talking about. Even as recently as 2 or 3 years ago, it wasn't happening. It really has, in the last year and a half, become an issue that is anyone who's concerned about the night sky is talking about. It's the growth of, as I said, low Earth orbit satellites, primarily for like SpaceX, to provide or offer internet services and that kind of thing. There are other reasons for these satellites. But what is remarkable, you can already see at certain times in certain places, already see these satellite trains, these many satellites that are linked together crossing the night sky. We have the exact number, it's in the single digits of thousands, 2, 3, 5,000 of those satellites in orbit right now, and they're already showing up in certain places in the night sky. What's really frightening, and as Connie said, it's almost apocalyptic, in some ways, at least for the night sky. The estimate are in 10 years, we could have 100,000 of these low Earth orbits, satellites orbiting the planet. And when I talked to an astronomer in Canada who's really clued in on this issue, she's just scared to death. And she just says it's the end of the night sky as we've known it.
I also recall it's also could interfere with research, with astronomical observations and,
Sure.
and
Yep.
knowledge that we have of the universe.
Yeah, it's already showing up on astronomers' images of the night sky, for example, the straight lines of the satellites. The other thing is another issue that it would be tough on is space exploration, because the idea of shooting human astronauts through 100,000 orbiting satellites to get them out into space becomes pretty fraught with peril at that point.
Mhm. There's a question about, there's a statement in the Q&A that I think suggests a question that we'd like to ask you. Tori says, I visit the Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge in Bloomington, and they have lights in the parking lot that focus the light to the ground, which is wonderful. And I'm wondering, what if we try to turn our attention to some solutions? What when a person sees the light pollution in maybe a governmental or public place, what can we do? Like, what would you suggest that how we try to educate those people and request them to use lighting that is safer for human health and wildlife?
Yeah, so with this issue, one of the reasons I've enjoyed working with it is we know how to solve it. It is not a problem that is so big that we just don't even know where to begin, or it's a big problem, but at the end of the day, we do know how to solve it. So that's a good thing to be thinking about. I think the first thing that everybody can do is to become educated about the issue, to go to darksky.org, which is the International Dark Sky Association. Check out the information there. A friend of mine who's an activist in Belgium who can speak pretty good English, but sometimes has a unique way of saying things, said, you must become weaponed with knowledge. He means armed with knowledge, as we like to say, but I like that idea of weaponed with knowledge. Learn about the issue, talk to people, talk to friends. We're all members of communities. So whether it's the place where you work or worship, the place wherever you have people that you can talk to, if you control lights yourself, whether it's at your home or your business or that kind of thing, take advantage of that. And then get involved in your greater communities, in your cities, in your suburbs, in your state, and follow the lead of people like Connie and others. I've been so impressed by people who are willing to engage directly with the people locally who have the power to affect change, and contribute how you can. I like contribute how you can, right? We all have different strengths, and I like to think that everybody can contribute in whatever ways. If people are interested in Starry Skies North, they're interested in night sky stuff, and we are hoping to team with anybody who wants to team with us to get a more robust lights out program in the Twin Cities during migration. We'd love to have you. So those are some ways that I think we can get involved. Talk to the people who can make the decisions about the lighting, and see what you can do.
Thanks, Paul. Keith is wondering if you know whether there has been research into how the sounds of the night differ in various levels of light. Because the sounds of the night often indicate the nature of life occurring in an area. And so that's a really intriguing idea that research might be able to somehow measure those effects.
Yeah, so I guess I'd say two things. One is I'm trying to think if I can think of specific examples of where light has seemed to impact. Um, I feel like there have been studies, say, of frogs, say in the spring, for example, that aren't making, the peepers aren't making as much sound in the lighted areas. I think I've read that or heard about that kind of research. Um, it stands to reason that a light at night is impacting the sounds of night. Certainly insects that make sounds are impacted. Any creature that has evolved with bright days and dark nights and uses sound at night, it would stand to reason would be impacted by artificial light at night. It can also impact things the other way, which I think there are also studies showing robins or maybe other birds singing earlier, right? They've changed their singing. I have to be careful when I talk about birds with a bird group because I don't have these studies in front of me, but I think it's not just, I would say this, it's not just the silencing of the sounds, the impact. It could also encourage sounds that weren't there before. But at the end of the day, as I said, species that have evolved with bright days and dark nights, they're going to be impacted by light pollution.
Someone sent me a couple of notes that say that a study found artificial light from street lamps and car lights was a key driver of the insect apocalypse, the alarming decline of insect populations, and that artificial light impacts almost every part of insects' behavior. And of course, being in here in a bird group, 96% of terrestrial birds feed insects to their young. And so it's very linked with our concerns about birds as concerns about insects. And fireflies rely on bioluminescence to attract our mate. So artificial light can confuse them. So there are papers out there. And if people are interested, we could even send a summary of some of these reports for more information. But there's another question from Tori. When I said earlier about lights that are mostly focused to the ground or around the Minneapolis airport, an area I live near, is the main reason for that to not obstruct air traffic control?
Are we talking street lights? Are we talking about? Maybe what I know that when I've flown into Minneapolis St. Paul Airport over the last few years, there has been a change. When you fly in and you look down and you see the LED lights, they are focused downward. But as I said, that hasn't meant a decrease in the amount of light that cities are emitting, unfortunately, even though they're focused downward. So I'm not exactly sure what Tori might be referring to. I live down by the airport as well, and let me tell you, it is one bright place because of all the lights probably on the runways and on the actual airport building itself.
Thank you. Tori, if you want to add another, any clarification or elaboration, please do either in the chat or Q&A. Someone has commented that they missed the comment about working toward a more robust Lights Out campaign in the Twin Cities. And happily, Kim would like to be involved, and how can we participate? Is that something that you're working on with the State Office of Audubon, Paul?
We haven't, unfortunately, yet reached that level of organization or action. So I think right now it's fairly aspirational. It is something that we want to do and that we intend to do. And so I guess to Kim, if Kim wants to write directly to me, I can certainly share what we've done or what we hope to do as Starry Skies, but that's kind of the extent of it at this point. I don't know what the state Audubon is planning to do or still does even. My sense is that, and Connie, you may know more. I know Joanna is here too. She probably knows about this, but my sense is that the Lights Out program has been neglected a bit of late, and we'd like to, that's what I say, make it more robust, kind of bring it back to life and really make it, if nothing else, raise the consciousness of it among people in the Twin Cities.
Yeah. I'd like to mention that looks like you're going to be hosting a night bird event at the Minnesota Valley Natural Wildlife Refuge on Friday, May 20th. Is that happening?
That's right. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, it's I'll have all new material if you come that night. We'll certainly probably talk about some of the same things, maybe read a little bit more, a couple more different passages from the book, but it's in partnership with Joanna Eccles. The idea is that, which I think will be really great, will be that we'll start with a talk, that I'll give a talk to start with, and then we'll go out and experience what we can experience of the birds at dusk, and as darkness rises around us, try to experience some birds that way. So I'm really looking forward to going out with Joanna and having that experience on that Friday.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. Is there a charge for that?
Oh boy, Joanna, maybe you can tell me. I don't think so. I think it's I've waived my usual fee of, yeah, I was going to make a joke, but I don't think
Joanna says it's free. Joanna commented it's free.
It's free.
You,
good.
Joanna.
Okay, good.
And we've put your email address in the chat for people who want to contact you directly. And Keith wants me to remind you that the Audubon, Minnesota office does have a policy director, and her name is Lindsay Bryce. And she's someone that you could contact for more information about that, their efforts for to keep lights out strong in Minneapolis.
Great.
And Joanna has encouraged people to sign up to help plan the May 20th event, which could be wonderful too. Joanna, do you want to put your email address in the chat as well for people to contact you if they want to help plan that event, and maybe others? And Tori has clarified that he was referring to lighting near the airport on Highway 62 and near on the highways to get to the airport, that those are downward facing lights. And hopefully the Department of Transportation knows now that they should be downward facing and shielded, and whether or not that is because of flight traffic, air traffic, I'm not sure either. Lindsay Bryce's email address is in the chat, someone to contact at the Minnesota Audubon office. And help us plan for how many people to expect. I'm not sure how to do that.
I think she was just saying sign up so that we know how many people.
Okay, yeah, sign up. Okay, respond to the Facebook post, or the it looks like there was there's a Facebook page for Twin Cities Urban Birding Festival website, or the Facebook page for that event. And Keith is saying if people want to get involved in our local chapter activities, Audubon Chapter Minneapolis, you could put our chapter name in your browser, or our URL is audubonminnesota.org. And we do have information in there about our initiatives. And one of the key threats to birds that we address in our chapters advocacy committee is light pollution, recognizing the threat that poses to birds, especially after the Cornell Lab of Ornithology named our region one of the worst in the country for migrating birds because of light pollution. And Kim has said it seems that we should be showing leadership, and that question suddenly disappeared. But I wanted to come back to that. I think I misspoke on the Audubon Minneapolis page is audubonminneapolis.org. But if we come back to what we can do, Paul, just to ask if there's, you said do what you can with, with where you are and what you know. Is there anything that you've prioritized for your new chapter of Starry Skies North that you consider your highest priority? Is it advocacy with lawmakers? Is it educating the general public? Are you pretty much working on all of those things at the same time, or do you, because I'm wondering in our own region, you've probably all heard of No Mow May, and they're trying to encourage people, don't cut your grass in May to try to, let some pollination happen with whatever flowers are in your lawn. Maybe there could be a no lights June, or, pick a month and do a huge campaign that different groups could collaborate on.
I mean, that's exciting to think about. I do think at this point, the efforts that we've worked on are primarily educational. So we've held a few different events at Wood Lake Nature Center, for example. And, it's remarkable how much effort it takes to get a group going, and to make some progress that way. There really hasn't been a group like this in the Twin Cities. And so we're sort of starting a little bit from scratch and working on the education piece, I think there are so many people who've just they may have heard the term light pollution. They have no idea what the real costs are and why they might be concerned. And so I think that is a big and worthy piece of it. That is probably where my strength lies more, is in writing and speaking about it. I really admire people like you, Connie, and others with Audubon who are really willing to speak with folks who have some power and who can really, or talk to the people who do have power to really work with legislation. And that we need people who we need lots of different members of the choir, as it were, as many as we can get.
Well, thanks, Paul. I want to give a shout out too to Keith Olstead and Ann Laughlin, other members of our ACM Advocacy Committee who have been really instrumental in whatever we've been able to get done. And I wanted to say too, we actually did have a meeting with Mayor Fry a couple months ago, and we did bring up that building in Minneapolis, the Capella Tower, that does all these light shows all the time. And we are probably going to reach out to them and ask them if at least during spring migration, they would not do that. Again, they think it's a great service to the community. And of course, we don't. Well, we're nearing the time, 8:15, and I'm wondering if there are any other questions, or I see there's something in the Q&A. Is this Zoom call available to review at a later date? Yes, we are taping it, and it will appear on the Audubon chapter of Minneapolis YouTube channel. I'm not sure how long it will take, but it will be there, and we can send out a notice to participants tonight and let you know when it's available. And I just want to thank you, Paul. It's been really interesting. And does anybody else have any questions or comments? Keith, Katie, Anne?
No, simply to echo Connie's appreciation, Paul. This was excellent. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you, Keith.
Thanks to everyone who came tonight. And I really look forward to more events and more collaboration with Starry Skies North.
Me too. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.